All right, here we go. So 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. All right, folks, welcome back to the podcast. I'm very excited to have as my guest today, Dorith Mous. Dorith, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
You are welcome. So multiple award-winning Dutch multi-hyphenate Dorith Mous was seemingly born into her art, gaining beautiful knowledge of physical form and capturing depth from a subject through her own nomadic experience as a fashion model for 2 decades. Having moved fluidly from a storied career in front of the lens to one behind it, as a photographer and filmmaker, Dorith elicits an artful finesse of the soul, one in which her subjects both exude and challenge the archetypes of beauty while provoking ideas, ideals, and ideologies. With her successful anti-discriminatory exhibition in New York City entitled IamYOU and her ongoing cinematic series Together Alone, which focuses on destigmatizing mental health, Dorith continues to create awareness by means of harvesting the honesty that permeates through her portraiture of subjects. Wow. Okay. Awesome. Thanks so much for being here. Before we get going, Dorith, share with the listeners where you're from originally and where you are currently.
Well, after that mouthful, that's a very easy one. I was born and raised in Amsterdam, where I currently am as well. In between that you just landed on, I was in a whole lot of countries around the globe for modeling. So I was basically not living here from like 18 to 33 or so.
Wow.
And then came back, and then it was COVID. So actually, I have no idea what it feels like to live here as an adult.
So let's get into this. How did you get into destigmatizing mental health?
It's something I discuss a lot, and also something that I am actually still investigating why and how it exactly happened. But I walked a long path of having a lot of challenges mentally, from not knowing how to deal with certain family dynamics, or dealing with bullies in school, getting not knowing if I had ADHD, not getting the right testing, but feeling like I did, and having people tell me all the time, like, oh yeah, Dorith, she talks all the time, she's so busy, and like this that was already quite stigmatizing. And that was all like early on, like childhood stuff. But then in high school, I felt like I was always on a certain level of depth. I always really enjoyed layers and humanity, what moves us, what scares us, what brings us joy, and all that type of stuff. And I didn't really know where to put that. And then as a model, I came into a world where there's like a gigantic spectrum of age, nationality, background, dynamics, like I just said, or, whatever type of person someone is. And this became such a large spectrum that I started kind of like filling in the blanks of who I was, and I couldn't really find that. And I noticed that was because I didn't really talk about the things that move me, bring me joy, bring me fear. And I was dealing with a lot of things by trying to cope with a lot of things by myself, which would, get me a bit insomnious and having a lot of nightmares and stuff. And I was living in New York City at the time, and I was like, well, if this is how I'm feeling and it's not so good, then maybe I should start talking about it.
So and this is while you were modeling?
No, not at all. No.
Okay.
I got scouted, and that's just something I rolled into. It's not something that I ever really identified with the industry itself, but the realm that it gave me, like the world that it kind of opened for me, allowed me to develop myself in all sorts of ways. And when I started talking about that very humanity that fascinated me, I also started talking about my own anxieties and my depression. And I noticed that I'd say 9 out of 10, I'd say 99 out of 100 people were reflecting and echoing back a lot of the feelings that I was having. And it made me feel so much less alone. But I was like, well, this is what I've been missing. The reflection of just honest.
How were you talking about this? What were you?
I started looking for people that I felt comfortable with. And this could be kind of like someone on set that I was in makeup with, or someone on a train. It could be a perfect stranger, actually more so strangers than people in my surroundings. And that brings an interesting scope, I think, of reflected emotions, because you don't know one another. And so what connects you is actually just mere humanity and how to deal with certain things. And so I got into such layered conversation with so many different people that I started to be really interested to tell stories, you know, to tell human stories. And
my question was, while during your modeling career this was going on, it wasn't why. I think you misinterpreted. I said, or misheard.
Sorry.
I said what? Yeah. So during your modeling this was going on.
Yeah.
Was the modeling profession, did it somehow exacerbate this feeling of anxiety, or how did it add to it, if
I
at
mean,
all?
I think, like I just said, I didn't really identify with the industry itself, but there were a whole lot of things that did emphasize certain feelings. So like aloneness is different than loneliness, but I was always traveling by myself, for example. Or like, you know, coming on set with strangers and like never really knowing anybody. And then, you know, trying to give people what they expect from you. And, you know, trying to fit in, and then maybe trying masks on, you know, is this me? Is this me? Is this me? So yeah, I mean, modeling definitely underlined a lot of the things that I ran into, like the hurdles that I ran into at some point were definitely kind of emphasized by the world that I was in. Yeah.
So you start engaging with strangers, which, I mean, seems really cool to me. What happens when you start doing that? What do you discover?
I mean, I think that with anything in life, conversing with somebody is all about the way you come into it, right? With what kind of intention and what kind of, you know, are you listening to the other person, or do you just want to talk about your feelings?
Right.
Is it like a two-way street, you know? And where is that other person standing is what you're going to say, welcome, you know? There could be a lot of things kind of obstructing that two-way street. But when you're going into it really openly and actually not expect them to think anything specific of you or of the things that you're going to say, it becomes that two-way street really, really easily. So I actually really enjoyed speaking with people about things that aren't on the surface, because you get to know someone quite quickly without actually knowing much about them, knowing them long, knowing how they're going to respond to certain things. You have no idea.
Such as
Makes it
what?
really,
Give us an example.
like, if you, for example, know that someone in your family, right, a family member, you know them for so long that you know that how they respond to things. And they might respond really aggressive or non-interested, or you know, religion comes in between, or knowing the same type of people and the effect that that has makes you hold back from saying certain things. Whereas when it's a stranger, they don't know you, you don't know them, and the honesty that kind of permeates through the conversation then is incredible, because you kind of go into it. And again, this is only if you go into it openly, so without judgment. Because if you go into it thinking all sorts of things already and have a prejudice, that's not going to work.
So, okay, you start doing this. What do you start experiencing for yourself?
Alleviation of feelings that felt dark. A lot of light started shining in, different perspectives of people, their efforts to get out of something, their stories of certain suffering, a lot of kind of relativized material, because you say something and someone either comes back with, oh my God, I had that too, like 10 years ago, and this you should do. Or they actually look at you and go, holy shit, I think you just made me realize that I have that too. Right. So like and all sorts of other reactions. So I don't know. I think through conversing and through being interested and curious, curiosity is very important to me. you start finding things out about yourself. You know, it kind of starts being like a circle, because you start thinking and reflecting back on what somebody says. And if a conversation rolls well and it flows well, it can kind of tick, 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 all these things that you never thought about. You know, someone can give you a quote or say, hey, I read this book or something. And like all of a sudden you're like, oh, you know, you have these eureka moments. Or you look at them and you go, well, I don't think they're dealing with it so well. I'm actually doing okay. You know, it's all about like the relative. It's all relative. Everything is relative.
So were you, during this time, were you doing your own photography?
I was photographing a lot of things that I during my travels. Yeah, I was always taking a 35mm camera on me. Yeah, I mean, if you travel the world and you run into certain situations that are worth photos, yeah, I was definitely taking those. So it was very documentary style things. You know, people in the street and
Yeah. Awesome. So how did it unfold such that you're like, okay, I want to start maybe packaging or managing this destigmatization. I want to do something. I want to help. What did that look like for you?
First and foremost, the amount of people that were reflecting aloneness. I was like, oh no, we gotta definitely make people more connected and share their story. And you know, what I was just saying about the connection and it rolling back, I really wanted to give that to other people. I wanted for other people to maybe be able to relate to someone's story, whether that be mine or a story that I'm telling for somebody else. And then, you know, reflect on that and then release whatever negative feeling they had before. So my interest in telling those stories was basically purely to connect people and help people that are looking for an out of the feelings that they're experiencing. Because it can be hard being human, you know? I find being human really hard. It's really challenging. And at the same time, it's the biggest privilege to be able to be human and not like a cat in the forest who has to be afraid that there's like, you know, something. I mean, a big cat is already a predator, but you know, if you're in nature, you will notice that life is like this, you know. And as a human, we actually have the privilege to experience all these things and actually live and reflect and relate. So I thought that was really, really important.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. It is really hard to be a human, and I think it even takes a certain amount of courage just to say that, you know, because as soon as you say that, I mean, you can hear people say, well, yes, of course it's hard, but, and then of course you go online and you look at everyone sipping margaritas on the beach and everything seems so easy. But from my experience too, I mean, I think I relate to what you're saying in that human connection is so profound, and there's something so assuring about it when you're talking to someone like you're explaining or describing. There's a certain amount of, I think, courage in opening up to someone, and that magic that happens when you realize you don't know each other. There isn't all this story and baggage, in a sense, behind both of you in that moment, and you can be open and honest, and that authenticity is to me, I love that, you know. When you were going through this, were you, to what degree were you struggling? I mean, was your anxiety still ever present? Did it get in your, how did it get in your way? Did it get in your way?
It definitely got in my way. I was struggling a lot. I think there were certain phases or several phases. The phase where I didn't realize how much I was struggling. The phase I realized how much I was struggling and needed an out. And the phase where I realized how bad it was kind of in hindsight and what it can do to kind of blind yourself, almost like, you know, what are called blinders, literally, I think.
Yeah.
To blind yourself by certain things that are very accepted in society. I think I just quickly said masking. I think, it's a big masquerade. And if you aren't brave enough or there enough or ready enough to admit that you're human and that you are struggling with certain aspects of that, it's quite easy to lose yourself in one of those masks. And especially I think in the big city, and especially if you're in a work field where a lot is expected, or where a lot of people know you or think to know you and put you on a pedestal. People in the public eye have this, like it becomes hard to admit. So I was definitely struggling. But like I said, in phases, I didn't really realize how much so. And once that quarter kind of like trickled down and dropped, I was like, okay, wait, I have nothing else to lose but my mind, because I thought I was going crazy. And my biggest fear in life, actually not anymore, but was for a long time, that I would be locked up. I thought, oh, but if I really start talking about my feelings for real, like if I really tell people how I feel, they'll think I'm crazy. And so, yeah, then obviously you don't want to talk about it. So for a long time, I knew that I was struggling, but didn't know what to do about it until I hit that point where I was like, well, this is kind of mental rock bottom. I wasn't rock bottom in life. I had very nice people around me. I love my family. My parents are still together. I have two very supportive parents in what I do and who I am. And so that was actually not hard, but mentally I was just like hitting this point of, okay, well, there's either stopping everything or talk about it. And I chose the latter.
At any time, did you kind of quote unquote seek help? Did you see a therapist, or how did that work out for you?
Yeah, my first therapist I started seeing at 19 years old, I think. But because I was traveling so much, there was no, and this was pre-internet. I mean, it wasn't pre-internet, but it was online,
Right.
anything, smartphones and all that wasn't there. So to be there in physical form, I'd had to be here. And I was living in New York at some point where therapy is extremely expensive. So it became a financial boundary, or barrier, sorry, to do that. But I must say, I've tried a whole lot of different things, self-help things. I've tried, someone would recommend me a certain type of herb, and I would start drinking a tea from that. My mother is very into, Eastern medicine and like alternative medicine. She would always give me tips of things to try. But I think if, you try something and it might help a little bit, or it might be a placebo effect. You might think that it's helping just because you're actually trying to make something help. It can give that effect. And then if you notice that that starts kind of edging off again and kind of fading, then at some point you hit a point where you're like, well, I tried everything. And you haven't tried everything. You maybe have tried 3-4 things, but mentally it feels like you've tried a million things.
Right.
And you've gone through that loop a million times in your head, and that's a thing. I think that's really important to also mention. It is, a lot of these things are happening in our head. They're actually not really happening. You have these graphs where you see the two circles, and you see how much of your problems are actually in your head and how much of it is actually happening in reality. And like, 80% of the circle is in your head. This doesn't mean that you're making it up. And I think that's the discrepancy. Yes, it is in your head, but yes, it's also real. It's real. Depression is real. Anxiety is real. Fear of dying is real. Insomnia is real. Bipolarity is real. Those things are real, and they're a real struggle.
So you started putting together what, a program, a show?
It's such a funny story. Every time I tell it, I kind of giggle at myself. I wasn't a filmmaker, and I had made a film, but it was very autobiographical. It was a black and white short film, and I had made it in one night. Um, I had no idea what I would be doing, but I had this idea of making a documentary about people that are going through mental health challenges. And so I just started doing a lot of research and like kind of, talking about and writing a lot of things down and reading books and da da da. And then I put on my Instagram a story or a post where I said, would anyone want to talk about their mental issues? you know, why not? Here's my email address. And it fed back like 40 emails overnight. And I was quite shocked that people actually wanted to share these things with me. And the biggest feedback of all these people was that they found it so inspiring that I was so open about my own issues that they actually really wanted to talk about their own issues. And yeah, it just made me realize how important it is to reflect, to, open up about these things and bring them out into the world because they're real. And one of the stories really stood out to me. It was a ballerina. And she was in that email very, very like impeccably well describing her first panic attack. And it resonated because I felt exactly the same things. Like the physical symptoms that she was feeling and the mental aftermath. And I reached out to her and I said, look, I read your email and it really inspired me, and I would love to actually have this on camera. Would you tell this story on camera? And she was like, well, yeah, I live in Hanover. Why don't you come over? And a while before that, a cinematographer had reached out to me, I think through LinkedIn or something, and had said, oh, I saw your first film. I really liked it. If you ever want to make something together, reach out.
Okay, wait, hang on. This is amazing. So the film you made, how long ago was that?
My first film,
Yeah.
2015.
Okay. 2015. And how did you make it? Well, what did you use?
So I this was all in New York. I worked as a model with a guy for a video. And we got to talking and we really got along. Also very on a human level. And I had an idea. I had a diary where I wrote like a lot of things, like feelings and quotes and poetry and stuff. And then I had this idea for a story, and I called him and I said, why don't we have dinner? And he said, oh, this is a great story. We should just film that. And he said, I'll just borrow a camera. But he was actually a good cinematographer. So I was really
Wow.
lucky because he showed up with like this, amazing set of lights and stuff. We
Oh,
actually snuck it into a hotel. I booked a hotel room and we snuck it in, and we told the hotel that we were filming the next day. We needed this stuff there. And we actually made a film in the hotel room in one night.
wow. Wow.
um, and that then was seen by the guy who had reached out to me. And I was like, okay, now I have different stories to tell. I'm gonna reach out to this guy.
Wow. That whole like domino thing is so cool.
Yeah.
So when you put it out on Instagram, who'd be willing to share, what specifically did you want, or were you hoping to get, or were you inviting people to share with you?
It was actually mere curiosity. I had the intention of doing something with it, but I didn't know in what form I really wanted to do that. In my head, it was a documentary, but I didn't even know how to go about that. So it was
Mm-hmm.
more about accumulating stories. I think it was more so of finding people that were like-minded and just seeing how many people I could kind of collect to tell stories so that it would kind of lay a foundation of
Mm-hmm.
not it just being me.
And to
Um,
tell stories of their what struggles, their
yeah,
need, their yeah.
I mean their mental journey, I guess, their psychological journey. And to me, at that point, I already figured out that the mental journey, the spiritual journey, the physical journey, they're all one and the same, only different aspects. That's like a diamond. They're just different, facets of it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that's what I kind of wanted to investigate, how people like feel these things, because some people will have a mental struggle in a certain way and deal with it very differently than another person having the exact same thing.
Sure.
And on another note, someone might have something completely different but deal with it the same as that person. And we all have our path. And I think it's extremely inspiring if we can kind of, collectively have that information and those experiences and see what resonates with us. This is what we do when we watch a film or we read a book. We remember whatever inspired us or warned us how we don't want it, or so yeah, it was mere curiosity. I wanted to know all these stories and what brought them to certain mental challenges, what took them out, how they shared it, to whom they shared it.
So you contact this ballerina. Do you go over there and film her?
Yeah, so I got into the van with the cinematographer. I reached out to him and I said, "Would you want to do this story with me?" And he was like, "Heck yeah, let's go." And we drove to Hanover and we stayed for 2 nights, I think. And we filmed her in the Staatsoper, which is like the theater in which they do all their ballets. And we had no idea if we were able to actually film in there because we didn't have a permit yet. But then we got there and we filmed some things, kind of just some little movement things where she practices. And then we showed it to the director of the theater and he was like, yeah, come film. And like kind of doors opened. I think from that very first message on my Instagram, or actually from the very first time that I started talking about it, because it's a domino, like you just said. Doors just kind of kept opening because you can't fake that. Nobody would tell that story to fake something. They'll only share that story because it's important to them, and that authenticity you can tell, right? So like doors open because people can see, like, yeah, this is real. This is important,
What did you want to get from this ballerina? And in turn, what did she want to share with you?
She shared everything, to my great delight, because we filmed her dancing, we filmed her in the audience, because her first panic attack actually happened watching a ballet. And so she is a ballerina, but she kind of had this depersonalization while she was in the audience, and it was her first panic attack. And as she described that, we thought we'd put that on film. So we actually filmed her sitting in an audience and kind of depicting her first panic attack. And then we did a interview at her house. I don't ever expect anybody to tell me anything. I don't point to a certain line because it's not my path. So whatever they want to share, they want to share. But I do notice that with that freedom comes actually their will to share it. I think when you give someone a platform and everything is equal, because we were all equal in that room. We were all, like I just said, we were all just human. We all have our own issues. And we were all willing to share it and to, investigate one another's psyche. So I was very lucky with her as my first subject because she was extremely open and didn't give me any stop signs of like, okay, this I don't want to talk about. She was very, very, very honest and vulnerable. And she showed us emotion. And it's actually amazing because we left her in a room. It's the only film with which I did that, but we left her in a room with a camera, and I was sitting in another room with a screen and kind of just like shouting questions into the other room so that she would kind of be isolated. And I think that really worked for her because it put a safety bubble around her, but it also put like a self-consciousness there. Like, okay, I'm sitting here in this room alone and there's a gigantic camera on my face, and Miss Director, who was not even a filmmaker, shouting questions at me from another room. But yeah, she did amazingly.
Part of the Together Alone?
Yeah, it became the very first episode, which I didn't know back then.
Okay. So how do things unfold after this ballerina?
Well, I got home with footage, still not being a filmmaker and not knowing how to reach out to anybody to do anything with that. Also was independently funded, and filmmaking is a very expensive hobby. So it kind of sat on the shelf for a little bit, and then I started being in Holland a little bit more. So my network started growing a little bit because, it's tiny here. So everybody knows each other. And I was telling this story to someone and they said, "Oh, maybe I should link you to this production company that I know. They might be interested." And I had a meeting there and they were like, "Okay, let's do this. We have an in-house editor. We'll throw it in like pro bono and do something with it." And still not really knowing what this should be, I thought, okay, well, maybe we'll make her footage like a proof of concept, like a teaser, so that we can maybe fund making more. But then during editing, her story unfolded, and we were like, okay, no, wait, this should be episodical, and this should be episode 1, however short it will be, because this is a proper story on its own and not just a teaser. So we put a lot of effort in like rounding that up. Started finding people to make music for it, licensing some songs that I really liked, and finding a titleist and a grader, a colorist, and it became the first episode, and it's like still, I think, my favorite because it feels like, I mean, I don't have any children, but it was like the first child, right? It's like this special moment of like doing something. Plus, very important to mention, it made me actually realize how badly I wanted to tell stories on film. So the filmmaker in me completely unfolded within this process.
Wow.
Yeah.
Really cool. Let me just remind everyone I'm speaking with Dorith Mous. Now, can people can people watch this series still?
Yes, absolutely. It's on a platform called Argo.
Okay.
It's a streaming platform for short film only. And episode 1 through 6 are on there. And we've actually just also finished episode 7, so that'll be on there by the end of the year.
Okay. We'll have that linked up here at the show notes page at the traumatherapistpodcast.com. Now, as you've moved through this series, Dorith, how has your overall vision, purpose, mission shifted or evolved?
It hasn't shifted. I think the direction of the road that I started heading in is still the same. I want to connect people and tell stories. Only I grew as a professional now in this field, and met incredibly inspiring people who were able to elevate it to a certain level of storytelling, which then also led to meeting people that are doing things in the same field that aren't filmmaking, but there are, forums and psychologists and people that have websites that sell merchandise to raise money for mental health, and like all these people. And from all those people, there's some that I have now kind of joined forces with, to see if we can actually build this out to also make sure that people receive the right type of support. Because the films are my way of telling the story, and it's a vessel to bring a certain message into the world.
And that message again is what?
That we're all human, and that's okay if you feel these things, and that if you're struggling with mental health, that or ill mental health, that there's help, and that there's other people feeling these things, and that you're not alone. And there's without resources, without information, without education, without connection, without like a whole scope of things, one gets isolated. This can be geographical, this can be familial, this can be relational, this can be any of the above or all. And so different places need different type of support. So we in the West who have streaming platforms that we can get onto, people that can afford to watch certain films or go to the cinema or whatever. And I'm not talking about my own films, but other films, or buy self-help books or go to therapy. That's all also an economical thing. And I think there's a lot of places in this world where mental health is not yet broken open because it's a luxury to be able to unfold yourself. And so outside of the films, my big quest now is to be able to develop educational programs and make sure that there's suicide prevention methods put in place in areas where it isn't so easy to reach out or to connect to someone who might have the same.
Damn, inspiring, Dorith. It's awesome.
Boom.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just thinking to myself, it's, I mean, I can really identify with what you're saying. This passion to connect, not just to connect with people, but to support them in that connection, and excuse me, to announce that it's okay if you're going through this, because most of us are, whether we want, and a lot of us don't have the guts to do what you're doing, to raise your hand and say, you know what, I'm struggling, and even to even go further and to sit next to someone in a train and to open up that conversation. That is so cool. So,
well,
wow.
it saved me. It was the only way for me. So that's I think that's also a thing. I think when we struggle, whatever type of struggling that is, that doesn't have to be only mental, but I mean, if someone is in a war zone, for example, that is the situation at hand. They can't change it. It's out of their control. And dealing with it, if you see people that come out of a war zone and have just lost family members, or their own kids, like terrible, terrible things, I always find them so extremely resilient, and they're always like, I meet people that had come from these areas and they're like so extremely friendly and compassionate and all that. And I'm like, well, that is because they've been through that mud so deeply that they wouldn't want to cause any trouble to anybody else, So it's also like, what do you do when you don't have another choice? To me, talking about it was literally like, that was my saving grace. If I wouldn't have opened up, I don't know what would have happened. I might have lost myself,
Was it that which gave you the courage to open up? That kind of, you said you didn't hit rock bottom, but you kind of hit a point. Was it that point where you said, I got to do something, I don't know what to do, let me just start doing this?
Yeah, I mean, this is an honest conversation, and I'll be very honest. I have never been suicidal in a way that I tried or that I thought about how I would do that. But I had suicidal ideation. And for anyone who doesn't know what that is, it's when you kind of always, or in a lot of moments in a day, imagine how that could happen. So at some point, for example, didn't dare to go by subway anymore because standing on a platform would make me fantasize jumping. Not because I wanted to die. Only later I found out this wasn't because I wanted to die. It's because I didn't know how to continue living. I didn't know how to get out of the feelings that I was having. And this is so intrusive when you're having thoughts that just fly on the go, the whole time. You drive yourself insane. And for me, talking about it stopped that because it taught me through people that really inspired me with their story. It taught me that a thought is just a thought. It can't kill you. It's also not out to get you. It might be there to teach you something, but it's just a thought. And just as that train that I may have fantasized jumping in front of, the thought is also just a train. It just, unless you make it stop at a certain station, it will go past, it will go. So yeah, for me, I mean, thank you. I see it as a big compliment that you say that it's brave, because bravery is a wonderful compliment. But I don't even know if it came out of bravery or that it came out of mere hopelessness or
desperation.
Desperation. Yeah, that's actually the word I was looking for.
Wow. Well, Dorith, I'd love to have you back to follow, not just to follow what you're doing, but to have you share your inspiration with our listeners here. What are you working on currently?
So yeah, so episode 7 of Together Alone will be coming out, and we've partnered with some amazing people in that episode. And we're trying to roll out what I just said, roll out some programs. One of which, the subject of episode 7 is Gabriella Wright. She's an amazing woman, and she's partnered with Deepak Chopra, with his foundation. And they have a nonprofit called Never Alone, and they have an AI chatbot called Peewee, and she's being translated in different languages right now, so that people can actually speak to someone. And it's yes, it's AI, but I think the anonymity and the way to, if you just want to put something out there in the world, it's a great way. And they had they supported over 300,000 people already. They had 23 million messages exchanged in the first year. And so these numbers don't lie. And so, yeah, I'm joining forces with them to see, what we can do for each other. I mean, she was my subject in my film, and I want to return the favor and be able to, grow the platforms that we have. And it's always better together.
Yeah, awesome. What's the best way for people to get in contact with you, Dorith?
Many ways. Instagram, I'm on my DM, so I actually also personally respond, which is at Dorith Mous, just my full name. Okay. If anyone wants to send me an email, they can. dorith@dorithmous.com.
Awesome. Well, like I said, love to have you back. You are doing it. I'm like, damn, awesome.
We are doing it.
Yeah.
We are doing it. Because without you, I'm just sitting here with a lamp on my face in my living room.
Look, really awesome to meet you. So inspired by what you're doing, and I appreciate it. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, really, from the bottom of my heart. Thank you. And talk to you soon.
All right. Bye-bye.